I'd like to call to order the Pierce County Council Economic and Infrastructure Development Committee meeting for March 25th, 2025. Time is 9:31. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Yes, good morning. Councilmember Herrera.
Here. Councilmember
Denson. Here. Councilmember Yambe.
Excused.
Councilmember Ayala. Here. And Councilmember Morrell.
I'm here.
You have 4 members present.
Thank you. Appreciate everyone being here on time. And we will move to item number 3, which is approval of the agenda. This time, I would like to rearrange the agenda and move our only action item behind the presentations of the historical honorary signage report. So just move the item number 5 to the back of the list as far as historical presentations go. So we'll deal with that legislation before we do the Vision Zero draft plan, okay? Are there any concerns? Okay, yeah, we will amend the agenda. Approval of the minutes from March 11th, 2025. Any questions, concerns? If not, the minutes of the March 11th, 2025 meeting will stand as presented. So with that, with the amended agenda, I will move to the 2024 Historic Preservation Grants update, and we will have Mr. Swanson do the introduction.
Thank you, Chair Morrell. I understand we have a couple members who are on a hard stop at 11 o'clock this morning, so we will move through as efficiently as possible here. I'll introduce your first 2 presentations at the same time here because they are in your packet together, and it is one presentation moving through. The first presentation you'll receive is an update on the 2024 Historic Preservation Grants Program, which was approved by the Council last year when Resolution R 2024-121 was approved. This resolution awarded $299,556 to 18 applications that had applied for Pierce County Historic Preservation Grants. The second presentation that will be in the same slide deck is again a report back on a resolution that was approved by Council at the end of last year. Resolution R 2024-258 was approved, which requested Planning and Public Works to put together the framework for a historic and honorary signage program for Pierce County. Both those presentations will be presented to this body today. Both will be presented by Becca Book, who is a senior planner with Long Range Planning. And with that, I will turn the floor over to Becca.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Great, now we should have some slides to go up. Thank you. Again, my name is Becca Book. I'm a senior planner, and I'm here today as the staff liaison to our Landmarks and Historic Preservation Commission. Next slide, please. So I'll be going over both the kind of broad framework of our historic preservation grant, and then I actually have the recommended allocations for this year, and then we'll go into a report back from next year, if that's okay with everyone. Next slide, please. So our Landmarks and Historic Preservation Grant distributes small yet meaningful grants to help the promotion and preservation of historical and cultural heritage throughout the county. It's funded primarily by the county's $1 portion of the $5 document preservation surcharge the auditor collects for each document that's recorded. And the Pierce County Landmarks and Historic Preservation Commission administers the grant program and provides recommendations for projects and funding allocations that then come to council for final consideration and decision. Next slide, please. There are 2 categories of projects that are eligible for funding through this grant. The first one is building projects that can receive a maximum of $35,000. This is grants to protect or restore buildings or structures that are listed on a historic register, so either our local one, the register of another jurisdiction within Pierce County, or the state or national historic register. For example, in 2024, this grant contributed to the acquisition of the historic Parkland School, which is now used as a community center, a seismic retrofit of the John F. and Edith McFarland House, and interior restoration work on Vaughn Library Hall, which is a meeting hall in the Key Peninsula. We also have non-building projects that can get up to $15,000 in funding. This is a huge and really diverse category of projects. It can cover document or artifact preservation, interpretive signage, historical research associated with Pierce County, and educational public events. For example, in 2024, this funded the Indigenous Voices podcast, and an award-winning series that shares tribal voices telling the Puget Sound history. In the past, it's funded research for HistoryLink articles on topics ranging from Pierce County artists to the fish-in protests of the 1960s. And it's also been used for things like installing interpretive signage. One project was at the Eden Boatyard at the Gig Harbor History Museum and shared the history of boat building in the area. While a number of funding sources exist for historic buildings, having this non-building category is pretty unique. Next slide, please. So the last time I presented to this group was in June 2025, and we reviewed some improvements that council members suggested for the Historic Preservation Grant. 5 of those have been integrated into our work. We worked with accounting staff to expedite repayments, including through creating purchase orders that lets us approve the amount before we get the invoice, and then when we get the invoice, it's pretty much hit send. We also invited grant recipients to sign up for electronic ACH payments, and for both the 2024 and 2025 grants, we have invoice templates to make sure we get all the information from the grant recipients that accounting needs. Council also asked us to do incremental reimbursement. In past years, we allowed only one invoice for the entire project, which can be a little tough for smaller nonprofits. And so in our 2025 grant contracts, we will allow invoices up to monthly. And this year, the grant will be fully reimbursable as opposed to previous years where recipients had to match the grant. So you had to pay double for the improvements as you got back from the county, which was a little bit confusing when we got to invoicing. So I think this will make things easier both for our grant recipients and for staff. And then we were asked to consider geographical equity. Our grant awards recommendations for 2025 include projects from every single council district. I think this is in large part due to council assistance with outreach. Your newsletters have a much broader audience than our staff channels, so I attribute the increase in the diversity and number of projects in large part to council assistance with outreach. And we also amended our scoring considerations to consider geographical equity and make sure we're showing you projects from a range of neighborhoods. Finally, we had a number of private residences that received funding, and so this year we just want to make sure there's a public access component to those private residences. That could be through a home tour. There were some interesting social media and YouTube videos for educational information about how to restore a historic building that were provided, and that would be considered in the scoring criteria. Next slide, please. So this is the grant awards over the last 12 years. The total amount of grants in blue that's what's been requested. That's risen steadily over time as knowledge of the grant has spread and the cost of renovation projects has increased. And there was a big jump in the grant funding requested in 2024 when new staff took over the grant, and we were asked to really put more effort into expanding advertising. The majority of the revenue from the document preservation surcharge is associated with property sales. So when property sales go up, there's more money available to fund historic preservation. In 2023, as interest rates increased, property sales decreased, and that resulted in less funding available this year. As you can see in green, we're actually awarding significantly less this year due to that lower amount of income for this fund. In 2021, there was a one-time $250,000 transfer from council to help fund the grant, and that's been used up. So that also is reflected in the lower grants awarded recommended for being awarded in 2025. Next slide, please. So this is our grant process. I noticed a typo on this morning. We began this process in August and September of 2024 when we opened the 6-week grant application period. We did some outreach during that period. We had a lunch and learn, and we also, I was available for questions from applicants. Staff then reviewed the applications for completeness and transmitted them to our Landmarks and Historic Preservation Commission to review and score. The commission reviewed those applications in public meetings in October of 2024. Applicants were encouraged to attend, and each applicant was given 3 minutes to answer any questions or provide additional information about their project. The recommendations in front of you today were approved on November 19th. And then we're reviewing these today, and they'll be final after being voted on by council, which I believe is scheduled for April 8th. Then that comes back to staff. We draft up the contracts. And the timeline has been pushed a little later this year. So to accommodate that, we plan to change the deadline for project completion to March 2026. In past years, it was December 31st, which was hectic. So I think this will give people time to do their work and will also make things smoother on our end. Next slide, please. So a quick overview of the evaluation criteria. Up to 5 points were awarded for equity. This includes how proposals benefit a variety of communities and areas around the county. 5 points were awarded for how well the project maintains and preserves history relevant to Pierce County. 5 points were awarded for this quality and strength of the application. Basically, did you do your homework and answer all the questions in there? And 10 points were awarded for public benefit. So does it make history accessible and affordable? Does it provide unique interpretive experiences about Pierce County history? And finally, 10 projects were awarded for urgency for project completion. On a building project, this might mean is the roof leaking and messing things up. And for non-building projects, it could evaluate time-sensitive opportunities for connecting community members to local history. Could you actually go to slide 11 for me? I'll give a quick update on our 2024 projects. So these are the projects that have been completed to date. In 2024, we funded 18 projects for a total amount of $299,556, $299,000. 15 are complete and have submitted for reimbursement, so that's about $240,000 of that total amount. You can see a list here. And then on the next slide, there are 3 projects that have not been completed. City of Lakewood chose to cancel their project because their Historic Preservation Commission is not full right now, so they're not able to make decisions. So they said they would like to just cancel that small award. And then 2 projects requested an extension. We're able to approve a 6-month extension administratively. So those are still pending payment, and that's $41,000. So there'll be some savings from the 2024 projects, which will go back into our Historic Preservation Fund. That's about $14,000 in savings. And then if you could go to slide 9, we'll fast forward to 2025 again. Okay, great. So this is what we're actually asking for your approval of today. We had a record number of projects apply. There were 25 projects requesting a total of $524,000 of funds, but only $100,000 was available for the grant this year. So our commission had some hard decisions to make. That was about 19% of the amount requested. So commissioners distributed the funds using a weighted average based on the score they received. And I've got one of our commissioners here, Commissioner Corice, who can provide some additional context on how they made that decision. So this is a list of the non-building projects, and the building projects are on the next slide. And also, they're both listed in your packet. Do you want to provide any additional context?
If there are any questions.
Okay. Great. So that is all I have to say about the grant, and we'll be happy to take questions and can also bring up Commissioner Corris to provide additional context if desired.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation. We have a few questions from committee members. Committee member Denson.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions, and thanks to the Commission for all their hard work. These are great programs and great projects. You made quite a few adjustments to the scoring process last year. Do you have anticipated changes for this upcoming round? Any additional things or anything we need to do legislatively?
No, we're not expecting any changes to the scoring criteria. We did a pretty good review last year, and I think everyone's feeling happy about where the guidelines are right now. There might be some minor changes to how, before everyone just emailed the applications to me, we might make some functional changes on the back end to keep ourselves organized, but that wouldn't change the scoring criteria.
Okay. My second question is, in regards to the building projects, can you tell me which ones of these are private, either private residences or private commercial buildings? Looks like quite a few.
For the ones recommended for funding this year, the 2025
yes, correct, yes.
You mind putting up slide 10 again? So the Asbury home site is actually a public space. It is a past home of a Black civil rights organizer, but it is now sort of open to the public all the time.
Okay.
Bob's Java Jive is a private business, but it is on the local as well as national historic register. It's under new ownership, who's trying to expand the time that it's open. In his application, he noted a number of community meetings that happen there when it's open in its capacity as a cafe. And also on here, the Kopinski drugstore is privately owned, and the Washington Hotel is privately owned. The drugstore, we got a sort of a letter of support from the State Department of Architectural and Historic Preservation. And the Washington Hotel, it's a private business. And the Herbert Williams House is also, that's a private business right now. It's opened as a cafe.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for those questions and comments. Committee Vice Chair Ayala.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate it. Just a couple of questions. I'm wondering if you could provide a bit more definition around public access and whether that relates to frequency or ongoing public access for the project.
That was the question we asked our applicants to answer, and we encouraged them to be flexible in how they provided that. So for our businesses, the private businesses we just discussed, that basically just means being open and letting people come in. For example, the Herbert Williams House talked about not only just having customers come in, but doing tours as well. For the ones that are actually private residences, which I don't think, so none of the ones recommended for funding right now are like someone's home. They're either a business that used to be a house or a public space. But for the ones that were private residences that aren't recommended for funding, things they suggested included doing like a past applicant has a social media channel that does brief little how-tos about restoring Victorian era houses. Past applicants have also just put themselves on the tour of homes. And then I know there's one that wasn't recommended for funding, but it's a prominent location, and they were saying just having that historic building that people walk by was valuable, and they have a plaque on the outside. So that's not recommended for funding, but I think that was how they answered the question about public access.
Great, thank you. And then question number 2, we received a list of the recommended funded amount and the requested amount. I'm wondering if you could just explain a little bit around how folks got to the recommended amount.
It'd be a good time for you to come. You want to talk about going from requested to recommended amounts?
Please introduce yourself.
I'm Robert Corais. I am the past chair of the Landmarks and Historic Preservation Commission. I was chair when we went through this process. So after we received all the packets electronically from staff, which is nice now that we're not killing as many trees as we used to, we go through, score them individually. And to answer your question, Councilmember Denson, several years ago we did, well, when I first started on this commission, we just assigned a numerical scores based on gut instinct, let's say. And after that, we had a member who was very well versed in grants and grant writing and developed a scoring rubric for us that we've used and modified. And what we have today is so much better than what we had when I first got on this commission. So we've had a lot of improvement. So we take that, we each individually score based upon the rubric that we've been refining over time and submit to staff. Staff then combines that, gets it back to us so that we can then discuss in our meetings. Then we had one particular member of our commission who has a lot of experience with the historic preservation and processes and such. And he put together a formula based upon, okay, we have these projects that are scoring very high, these that are sort of middling and less on down, and suggested, well, you know, we can give these this percentage, this grouping, this percentage on down as a way to try to spread the wealth as best that we can. And we looked at it. There was total consensus that this is something that we could all support, and that's what we moved forward for council.
Thank you so much.
Answer your question?
Yes.
Any other question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Great job.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, Committee Member Herrera.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about the ones that didn't make it, and some of them are glaringly low scoring. In particular, the Buffalo Soldiers Museum, if we could talk a little bit about them. They're quite unique part of the community, and just one, I mean, 11 points, I think. That's pretty low. They either didn't get something done or weren't educated. I know they've been around for a while, but I just would like to hear a little bit about that.
They requested funding to rent an event space for a fundraiser, and that is not eligible for funding under this grant. We did, some people just gave them zeros, said it wasn't eligible. Other people recognized their value to the community, but gave them low scores on the sort of doing your homework part. So they did apply for this same thing last year, and we let them know that the event wasn't eligible for funding through this. I can certainly make sure that's clear after this
Okay.
conversation.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Committee Member Yombe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm blurting this out loud. I was like, well, we just need to fund this better. But anyway, that's just me blurting out before I've had coffee. With the criterion that's established by the committee to evaluate, I'm wondering, do applicants get a heads up beforehand on what kind of, like maybe a 101 on what is, the usual things that people we fund and we don't fund, so that things like a one-off event aren't, and I know that this is just one time here, but I can just imagine seeing how some of our other processes for other boards and commissions have worked, and sometimes each committee has to, have the chance of having somebody who comes in with a certain particular lens, like Commissioner Corey said, and really be able to say, hey, you know what, let's put a rubric here and let's start, scoring it, and think about all these other things. But is there like a, instruction, like a one-pager or something that says, hey, these are the things that we commonly fund and this areas we don't, so that, any potential applicant who don't know how to navigate our system are just given a heads up and saying, so that, it's not setting it up for, not failure, but,
The guidelines, including how the projects are scored, are posted ahead of the application period. I did that lunch and learn, which that pie chart that was about how we score things, that's directly from my lunch and learn during the application period. And I was available for questions during that whole application period. I think the most common question I got was, is this project eligible? I did not get one from the Buffalo Soldiers Museum, but I spoke about that with a number of other potential projects. And then a new thing we put on the website for last year was examples of past funded projects, which I think was a good way to inform future applicants as well as celebrate some of the work that was done.
Yeah, I'm not expecting us to do work for everyone else, but it's kind of like, when you call people and we try to get them all to participate, then they have at least a rough idea, which it sounds like the opportunity was provided for them to do that. So I definitely appreciate that. And so, I feel a little bit much better about that. So thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for those questions. And just for the record, Committee Member Yambe's been here at the beginning of the presentation, so he's been here a little while. So appreciate you, showing up. Okay. Any further questions of the presentation? I don't see any. I just have one quick question. Mr. Swanson alluded to the funding of this program. Could you walk me through how that's done? And is that those dollars collected from all of Pierce County? It's not just unincorporated. So can you walk me through that?
Yeah, so there was a state law that's been around since, I believe, the late 80s that allows for this document preservation surcharge. Pierce County opted into that. It's collected by the auditor for every document recorded in all of Pierce County, included incorporated areas. And that's $5 for document. I don't know where the other 4 goes, but we get one of it. We've had a separate fund since 2020. It's Fund 188, Historic Preservation. It primarily is funded by that $1 per document, just dribbles in there. And that's mostly recording deeds, recording real estate transactions. And there's some other smaller amounts too that I'm not recalling off the top of my head. And so that money kind of like dribbles into the bucket, and council can decide to put additional money into Fund 188, and that's happened once that I'm aware of in the 5 years we've had that fund. And then at the beginning of the grant cycle, I spoke with our financial team, and they let me know how much was available and how much they recommended keeping in there for covering the management of this program. So in that historic preservation fund, about 80% of the money goes directly to communities through this grant. It also covers about 1/10 of a full-time employee. It covers our administrative team, their time for sending out meeting minutes, making sure the meeting for the Historic Preservation Commission happened for the entire year. So some administrative costs, and then there's a small amount for advertising the grant, and for it's been used for staff training in the past too.
Okay, so in your viewpoint, how much of the 100% of the collected money is actually distributed? What percentage do you use for administration and expenses?
I actually wrote that down. On average, 84% over the last 5 years has gone to the grant. And then I don't have a number for the salaries and benefits, but that covers 0.1 FTE, so for our admin team. And then there's a little sliver, maybe well, I guess it's whatever, the difference between that tenth of an employee and the 84% going to the grant goes to advertising and training.
Okay, so within the RCW, it allows you, the auditor, to collect the money. There is the ability to take out an administration fee out of that?
I don't have the language of the RCW in front of me, but I can confirm that.
Okay. Whatever legislation was implemented for you to pull a dollar out of the collected fee in that legislation, whether it be an ordinance or an RCW, it allowed you then to take a percentage for administration.
That's my understanding, but I can review the RCW and get back to you.
And Mr. Swanson, maybe you can answer that.
Yes, thank you, Chair Morrell. The RCW is actually very broad in its allowable use of historic preservation. We don't actually have to run a grants program at all. The Pierce County does enough as far as archiving documents, as far as preserving our records. We could easily justify containing within Pierce County government 100% of that money. Previously, when it was accounted for when these grant programs were accounted for in the general fund before this body created separate Fund 188, that was a conflict from time to time. Was okay, what percentage is going out in grants? At times when maybe more revenue was coming in document recording, what was being held back, it wasn't very clear. That was a big catalyst for creating that fund, was to segregate these grants and ensure that that $1 portion, to the greatest extent possible, was going out into the community. And it's what's gotten us to that kind of 84% number. Whereas before, we didn't necessarily have a mechanism for figuring out on a year-to-year match, mainly because these dollars don't necessarily go out in the year they're allocated, so that's where it became a little murky. Ms. Book had mentioned earlier the one-time kind of supplement that the county had put when this fund was created, that the council had put in, the $250,000. That was actually the best, well, I shouldn't say the best. That was what we calculated. I calculated going back what I felt had come in the previous 5 years in this $1 that had not been allocated to these grant programs. We probably could have gotten to 500,000 justifying it, but that was kind of the clearest number we had of, clearly about $250,000 had come in the previous 5 years that had not gone out to these grants, and that's why the decision was made to move that over.
Okay. Thank you for that explanation. I know that former council member Marty Campbell really wanted to take a deep dive into this program, and Mr. Swanson ended up going with him on that deep dive. And
I should add for the record, Mr. Chair, there is no thought that the money was spent outside of what the RCW allows. Everything spent from the fund was well within the RCW. The RCW just does not require these grant programs, and it's a policy decision of this body to dedicate those funds to these grant programs.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that explanation. Okay, Ms. Book, is there anything else that you want to?
I have another agenda item on historic road signs if we want to move to that one.
Okay, so we will close out that part of the presentation. Mr. Swanson, do you want to introduce the next one?
I did briefly mention it in the initial introduction. I'll add again. Back at the end of last year, in December of last year, Council did approve Resolution R 2024-258. This did direct the Planning and Public Works Department to develop a framework for a program naming historic and honorary roadway signs. I'm sorry, naming the roadways and then having the signs placed. Currently, this has been done periodically throughout different pieces of legislation. There is no formalized process for doing this, and there is no kind of landing spot for somebody, a member of the public, who would want to have a roadway segment to land and find like one set of instructions of how to apply to have that done. So that was the direction given to the department, and the report you're about to receive is what's coming back from that resolution.
Okay. Okay, so we'll move to the next presentation, historic and honorary signage report.
Well, that was a great introduction, so we can go straight to the next slide. So just an overview of how we got here. In February of 2024, we did receive a request to install a historic road sign. That's the brown historic names that you can see under the traditional green street signs. It was for historic Gloyd Road, and the request was to install that at River Road at 50th Avenue East within the Puyallup Reservation. The Gloyd family came west in a wagon train and held several positions in early 19th century Pierce County government. And the proposed sign is near where the Gloyd family lived from 1896 to 1940 and brings back a historic road sign name. Former Councilmember Campbell asked the Landmarks and Historic Preservation Commission to review the request and update procedures for reviewing historic road signs. And they took up that issue and voted on updated proposals in July 2024. Staff have been continuing with the Puyallup Tribe of Indians both to review the procedures and to request input on the Gloyd Road sign, since that's within the reservation. They met with the applicant and developed an alternative proposal for Old Peasup Gloyd Road that honors both the original Puyallup allottee of that land as well as the Gloyd family. Tribal staff wanted to get input from tribal council, and they have not had time to take up that issue yet. So we have not taken action on that Gloyd Road sign request yet. And then in December, as Mr. Swanson mentioned, we got this official resolution that formally directed staff to provide recommendations regarding a honorary and heritage roadway naming program. So on the next slide, you can see our recommendation. So in your packets, there should be a copy of the full road naming procedure. That's our full recommendation, but there were 7 specific questions in the resolution that I'll go over here. The procedures list 12 criteria to consider when deciding whether to approve the application, including tribal concurrence if the road sign is within a reservation, whether the name illustrates Pierce County's heritage, and whether it brings back a previous historic name. Staff developed an application form. We plan to put that on our historic preservation website. We would ask the applicant to provide their contact information, the location of the road segment in question, a narrative history of the name, and any relevant documentation. And special consideration will be given to proposals initiated by elected officials of federally recognized tribes with treaty rights in Pierce County or their designees. In order to verify the information provided in the application, staff will review the completed application, and we will look at past ordinances renaming roads to verify if the proposal brings back a historic name, and then we'll bring it to our commission. Our Historic Preservation Commission includes an archivist on the committee who could assist in verifying the information, and all of the members have an interest in local history and might be able to provide some additional context. Staff will then distribute the application to the Office of the County Engineer, the Development Services Cartographer, South Sign 911, and any local historic society for comments. Their review will help ensure the proposal aligns with manual uniform traffic control devices. There is also a chapter in Pierce County Code about our addressing and grid system. Staff will do the review to make sure that the proposed name doesn't conflict with that. So, for example, if the name right now is 100th Street and you want to rename it 101st Street, that would be confusing, and we wouldn't recommend that for approval. There aren't any code changes required to implement this program, but we recommend including some high-level direction in code just so people know that this responsibility exists within the Historic Preservation Commission. I've been working on some of those code changes, and I assume it will come back to this body in summer or fall. We have to do some scheduling. And then in regards to fiscal requirements, if a sign is approved, the applicant would be responsible for the cost of installation, and the Office of the County Engineer would estimate that cost. We spoke with them regarding this Old Peasup Gloyd Road request, and they said it would be $500 for one sign. They also recommended, the Office of the County Engineer did, that the applicant would be responsible for installing a new sign at the end of life. They have a GIS system that they can record who should be responsible for installing new signs. Next slide, please. So Zooming back out, the proposed process for historic road signs, once we get this application up on the site, would be first, staff request tribal input if the sign falls within the boundary of a tribal reservation. And then we would give their tribal historic preservation officer 30 days to provide input. Staff would then schedule a public hearing and notify all properties within 300 feet of the sign of the public hearing. That would typically happen in a standing meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission, and that would give people a chance to provide input if they support or don't support this sign. And then that recommendation from the commission will be forwarded to County Council for a final decision. And that's all I have on this.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have plenty of questions. Committee Member Herrera.
Thank you, Chair. Just to be clear on the process, so on the tribal input within the boundaries of the reservation, and then your public hearing, and then the council action. So if it's not in the boundaries, we just skip that whole. We start with the public hearing.
That was actually, so I sent the procedure to all the tribal historic preservation officers with treaty rights in Pierce County for review. The only body that was able to spend some time doing that was the Puyallup Tribe of Indians. They actually recommended that it just be for signs within their reservation. I think we sent them a lot of things to review, so they were trying to prioritize their time a little bit. So
Absolutely.
That's a recommendation.
And I see that there's a little proviso on there, 30 days. Is that, and if we don't hear nothing from them, we just move forward, or how's it work?
Yes.
Okay.
On the Gloyd Road request, since it is now a sort of combo name from both the Puyallup Tribe of Indians and the Gloyd family, we have given them additional time, but I think it might be advisable to move forward on that. 30 days was also reviewed and recommended by the Assistant Tribal Historic Preservation of the Officer of the Puyallup Tribe. That's similar to the timeline we give them for other issues to review.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for those comments.
He asked my question. 30 days enough.
Okay, just curious. Okay, yeah, I guess I am a little concerned about the 30-day response due to the fact that their timeline is not our timeline when it comes to making these decisions. And it's kind of like, we'll give you 30 days. If you don't, we'll do it anyway. I don't know. You might want to work on that a little bit.
Yeah, I can certainly request additional input.
Okay.
I assume you're thinking a longer time period would be more appropriate?
Obviously that's on tribal land, reservation land, so most of the county is not on that. So I think they're, again, just being sensitive to that timeline is, I think, important moving forward. So, okay. Committee Member Yambe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So also I'm curious about the same item. Is it that they have agreed that their non-response is their signal of A-OK? And then the second part of this is this something that is beyond just the realm of staff to staff? Is this also something that the council has to extend, some communication with their council, because it's direct? Often when we're doing tribal relations and things, that sometimes the I'm not going to say pecking order, but the order hierarchy here sometimes requires that the elected bodies communicate just as much as staff. I know that in City of Fife we had our good relationships with staff to staff, but oftentimes that only extended so far, and some of the other stuff had to be done by a legislative body or higher. So I'm just curious.
In past conversations with tribal staff, they have, and tribal representatives, we're encouraged to speak to sort of like our peers. So I don't think it would be appropriate for staff to be reaching out to elected officials. So the proposal here is for county staff to speak with tribal staff. Just to be clear, the person that reviewed the past procedure has actually moved to a different position and is no longer with the Puyallup tribe, so I think it would be appropriate to ask them for input again. Her recommendation was, if you don't hear anything, no news is good news. And we've heard that on other things as well. They have a lot of stuff to review and don't provide comments on things they're not concerned about. I could definitely see it being appropriate for the council to reach out to tribal council. I think that would be more appropriate than staff sending things their way. I don't know if that would be in our procedures or in our code, but we can definitely discuss that.
I'm not trying to make it more complicated than it is. It's more just curiosity and knowing how, intergovernmental relations with tribes is a very delicate thing. And, we want to continue building that relationship and furthering those things. And I'm just trying to think, whether, sometimes just because you don't say that you're uncomfortable doesn't mean that it's not, adds up over time. So, but I'm not trying to make it more complicated, but it's just something that I'm thinking about. And I think that it's something I'm mulling over. So
in our current sort of example, we got feedback from the Puyallup tribe that they did need more time and they wanted to consider it further, and then we extended that timeline. So that can be included in the procedures too. I think the 30-day deadline was meant to, like, if they don't take it up, if there's no comment, then we move on.
okay, appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you for those comments. Committee Member Herrera.
Thank you, Chair. Just one real quick one thought. As our procedures, do they mirror the City of Tacoma's? I know they have a sign thing because, the reservation has 5, Tacoma and us. So
Yes, they're similar to the City of Tacoma's. That procedures was forwarded to me by Puyallup staff and Puyallup tribe staff. And in particular, the language around the time that they get to review and the individuals who can represent the tribe in suggesting names, those were pulled directly from City of Tacoma.
perfect. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. For any more questions of the committee on the historic and honorary signage report? Don't see any. I think, Mr. Swanson, there's some reflection that needs to happen on some of this as far as if there is a policy that needs to be generated, but we can talk later on that. So thank you, Ms. Book. Always nice to see the historical aspect of the county being moved forward. Okay. With that, we will move the item forward and look at doing proposal number R 2025. We're going to do proposal number R 2025-112, and that is the only action item that we have today. So will the clerk please read it in the record?
Proposal number R 2025-112, a resolution of the Pierce County Council approving the 2025 Pierce County Historic Preservation Grant Fund disbursement as recommended by the Pierce County Landmarks and Historic Preservation Commission.
Thank you. Mr. Swanson, do the introduction, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair Morrell and committee members. Before you this morning is the annual resolution authorizing the distribution of historic preservation grants. This will be for the 2025 cycle. Much of the previous presentation already went through much of this, so I will trim down my comments. I just want to highlight getting into a little more into the funding of this. As was mentioned earlier, you know, the $1 portion of the historic dock fee does feed into the Historic Preservation and Programs Fund to fund this program. For the 2024-2025 grant cycle, I would note the county had budgeted $480,450 for both years of this biennium. Last year, with the approval of R 2024-121, $299,556 of that was awarded to 18 applications for last year. That would leave an approximate $180,000 would be remaining from that biennial allocation. Anticipated in that, though, was $452,800 of additional revenue coming from that $1 portion. As of January 31st of this year, only $137,937 has come in. So that's only 30% of the projected revenue. So we do have less revenue coming in than was projected. There was an anticipated end-of-year fund balance of $90,000, and plus, as you saw from the 2024 grant cycle, there's at least about $15,000 that will be underspent from the previous year. That is kind of a long way of just getting to tell you that at least from a council staff perspective, I know planning staff had mentioned that finance was okay with the $100,000 being allocated, but we have verified at the council staff level that $100,000, there should be sufficient funds to cover that $100,000 in there. That shouldn't unless the revenue really falls off the cliff in the next the 11 months we hadn't looked at, that $100,000 should be able to cover within the fund. We wanted to make sure we were on the record as council staff presenting that to the committee. Again, Ms. Book had already gone through much of this. I would just point out that an equity analysis has been completed and is in your packet. Also, along in your packet, there are two attachments to your packet. One that does show you that scoring criteria that was discussed earlier, the average scoring criteria. And you can kind of see the allocations, how that kind of mirrors the scores that various applications got. And then we have another attachment that just gives you a very brief 2-sentence description of each project, and then gives you the district numbers on there too, so you can go and those are all the applications, not just the ones awarded, so you can get an idea of what's been applied for in your district as you go through. Again, with that, Mr. Chair, everything else was pretty much covered in the previous presentation. So we do have council staff, and then Ms. Book from Planning and Public Works, and we do have the former chair of the commission available to answer any questions. I would note we also have one of the applicants in the audience available to answer any.
Okay. Ms. Book, do you want to make any comments? Okay. Thank you. Bob, do you want to? Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, this is a public meeting, so I will open it up for public comment at this time. Anyone in the room could come forward and address Resolution 2025-112. You'll have 3 minutes to do that. And so if anyone in the room wants to come forward, then we'll go to anyone online.
Hear me?
Yeah.
My name is Jean Costanti, and I'm a volunteer board member with the Historic Slavonian Hall Foundation. And I'm here just to see if you have any other questions about our application, our grant application. So I'm a contractor by trade, so if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them if I can. And this is for the west wall of our building, which is 125 years old. And the west wall, the whole siding of the entire building is asbestos. So we are trying to work our way forward to remove it when we get funding and replace it. And along with that, we always like to tell anybody that have any interest in what we're doing is the fact that we include our neighbors just to make sure that they know what we're doing. The Mountaineers are on one side, the next door is Dr. Plansich and his buildings, and then across the street. Because when you do abatement, you have to let everybody know, especially when the company comes in, hazmats up, and takes it all off. We provide signage for all of that. We give them much advance notice. So anyway, our building's 125 years old. So if you have any questions for me, and if I can answer them, then I'd be happy to do so.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your comments. I don't see any questions at this
good.
time. But
Okay.
thank you for coming down here. It's nice.
Well, thank you for your
See-
time this morning. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else in the room want to make comment on this resolution? Not seeing any. We'll go online.
Yes, Mr. Chair. For any members of the public who wish to provide comments on proposal number R 2025-112, press the raise hand icon on Zoom or star 9 on your telephone keypad. Mr. Chair, looks like we have one hand at this time. Last name ending in Collison. Please state your name for the record. You'll have 3 minutes.
Good morning. This is Julie Collison. Hi, how you guys doing? I am the current chair for the Historical Preservation Commission, and I just wanted to comment about how impressed I have been with Becca Book's handling of the Preservation Commission since she took over, and I think she's done such an excellent job. I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those uplifting comments.
And at this time, there are no other hands, Mr. Chair.
Okay. At this time, we will close public comment on the resolution R 2025-112. Move it back to the committee. Are there any further questions that any committee member has? I just have one question, Mr. Swanson. On the allocation for the Parkland Community Association, Ms. Book, you might need to answer this. Does the applicant need to be the owner of the building, or can a tenant make a recommendation?
The applicant does not need to be the owner. If they are not the owner, we ask for a signed attestation of the owner to be included in the application.
I would just be curious to see if the lease allows someone to make these renovations without going through the owner of the facility.
I believe Commissioner Carlson, who is, if she's still in line, I believe she's involved in the Parkland School. If she's able to provide more comment, I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with the terms of the lease, but they did provide a very large amount of documentation, including quotes from a number of contractors for a multi-year project to do renovations. In their materials, they did not include the full terms of the lease, but it could be requested, I suppose.
Okay, so it's my understanding that PLU actually
They
owns the
purchased
building.
it as of, actually, our last year in our 2024 grants, we funded part of the down payment on the building.
Okay, I just want to make sure that everyone's on the same page and we don't end up, in there again, it would be a reimbursable, right? So they do have to do the work before they.
Yes, they submit the receipts and we review them before refunding the.
Okay, I just don't want to get caught. Someone does a renovation and then the owner of the building says, we did not give them permission to do that.
Yeah, I cannot speak to the full structure of that organization, but in 2024, this grant did fund the purchase of the Parkland School building.
Okay. Just verifying that and putting it out there.
Right.
So thank you. Thank you. Okay. If there's no further questions, I will look for
Chair Morrell, we do have a hand raised from a commissioner.
Okay.
Julie's on.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Councilmember Morell. I just wanted to assure you, I'm also the first vice president for the Parkland Community Association, and we are the owners of the building. We have quite a big mortgage that we owe to Pacific Lutheran University, and they have approval of any leases that we do issue for the building. And we are in contact with them pretty much in regards to the building. So we are, like I said, we are the owners, just to confirm that.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that confirmation. And
You're welcome. Would you like a tour? I'm happy to give you a tour one day.
Yes, actually, I was there last month during the cold spell, and it is challenging to get in and out of that building via wheelchairs. So I I see why you need that, definitely. But anyway, thank you for the offer. I might take you up on it.
Okay, thank you. Okay. You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. Committee Member Yonbe, do you have a question?
No, I'm just ready for that.
Okay. Okay. Then going back, I would entertain a motion from Vice Chair Ayala. I'm sorry. There you go.
Motion to move or motion to pass?
I would say motion to approve Resolution 2025-112 and forward it to the full council with a due pass recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. I move that proposal R 2025-112 be forwarded to the full council with a due pass recommendation.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we approve Resolution 2025-112 and forward it to the full council with a due pass recommendation. It's been seconded. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those who are not in favor, say nay. Okay, the ayes have it. The motion carries. It'll be forwarded to the full council at a date certain at some point in time.
April 8th.
April 8th.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate everyone's work on that. I appreciate the commission's work on it, especially for the last couple of years. It has gone through quite a transition, and again, we appreciate Ms. Book's work and dedication on this, and then the commission members also, so thank you. Okay, we will move to our final presentation, which is a Vision Zero draft plan. Mr. Swanson, do you want to do the introduction?
Yes, thank you, Chair Morell. The final presentation we have today, and I will give a time check. We do have 25 minutes remaining until 11 for our time check here. We have a study session on the draft Vision Zero action plan. In 2022, the council approved Resolution R 2022-118, which is endorsing the national initiative of Vision Zero as a countywide strategy. This directed Planning and Public Works to develop a comprehensive action plan. Today's session will provide an overview of the draft, its key focus areas, and implementation strategies. I would note we are still anticipating the next meeting having the actual legislation before this body. We're hoping for that to get forwarded to council hopefully today or in the next few days. So we're trying to get that before you. This study session will just go over the key elements of the draft so that we are better prepared when we have that actual legislation here to be able to move it on the anticipated timeline. With that, I'll be turning over to Brian Chandler, who is a consultant for Planning and Public Works from DKS Associates, and he will be going over the draft plan for you. Mr.
Thank you,
Chandler.
Tom. Yeah, good morning, everyone. Good to see you again. I'm going to give a brief overview of the Vision Zero action plan to date, the work that we've done so far. The details are in your packet. We'll do a pretty quick overview of the slide deck that we've prepared for today and leave some time for questions for this morning. So next slide, please. First, taking a quick look at the timeline, this starting as mentioned back in August 22, there it is, the adopted resolution, and then continuing on through about the last year, we've been working specifically on the activities of developing the Vision Zero action plan. I'll talk through some of those steps in subsequent slides. Most recently, conducted an open house in February, and then, of course, today's study session. Then the next steps, maybe the last chapter first here, is the Transportation Advisory Commission is meeting on Thursday to make their recommendations, and then additional meeting, as Mr. Swanson mentioned, next month, and then anticipating or requesting a full adoption by council by the end of April. Next slide, please. This is the plan itself, at least the cover page and the table of contents. Next slide. And first, talk a little bit about the public engagement efforts. Next slide, please. This was conducted largely in 2024 and was fairly extensive. A lot of in-person events, online events. I'll go ahead and go to the next slide, please. We'll talk about those. We did hold at least one public engagement event in each of the council districts, as you can see on the map there on the left side of the screen. And you can see these in-person events occurred between May of 24 and August of 2024 of various different locations. Next slide, please. We also put together a survey. We received over 900 survey responses. The survey was provided both at these in-person events and was available online. And in it, we had different questions that the public could answer related to what they saw as the primary traffic safety needs within the county, and then the ideas that they may have on solutions or what they'd like to see to make the roads and make travel safer within Pierce County. Next slide, please. This is that first question. The question was, what are the major issues that affect your safety on the roadways in unincorporated Pierce County? And in this particular one, we did have a series of items for them to choose from. You can see from this graphic, speeding or people driving too fast and distracted driving were two of the top items. Also, a lot of discussion or mention of sidewalks. They were able to select more than one item from this list. Next slide. The second question is, we asked them more, do you have ideas about solutions, how we could improve safety? In this particular case, we left that one wide open, so we didn't give them a checklist. We just it was a free form answer. And we took their answers and then put them together. So there's a little bit of kind of art to what did people say and then how do we put them in the categories. But you can see the top ones are pretty clear here. More law enforcement, roadway improvements, pedestrian safety, and traffic calming were the top items that came up from the public in terms of the type of improvements that they're most interested in. Next slide. We also asked them to provide information on specific areas or roadways or intersections that they have concern about. And we did try, this is something kind of new to us, we tried to quantify that a little bit. You can see the lighter color here are roadways or intersections where we had some folks provide comments. And then the darker color there is where we received a lot of comments on those particular roadways. Next slide. Also, as mentioned, we conducted an online open house in February. This included a first draft of the plan itself that was available as part of that open house and was available on the website, and received comments back from that event. That was essentially 2 weeks, had the open house available online. Next slide. I'm going to talk just a little bit about some of the findings. So this is looking at some of the different emphasis areas and the strategies therein. And this is where we kind of did an overview look of what we consider like the types or the attributes of different crashes within the county. Next slide. This is where I also want to talk a little bit about how we analyze the data. So at the very beginning, we did a broader look at the entire county. We call this our county-wide analysis. In that case, we looked at city streets, county roads, even some state DOT routes, not the freeways, but the roads like SR7 as an example. And we wanted to get a picture of like really the big picture, what's going on within Pierce County. But pretty quickly we pivoted to focusing just on unincorporated county roads. So everything that you're going to see from me the rest of the day is focused on just those unincorporated county roads, the roads where we would actually be doing work with county funds or applying for grants as the county. And so starting first kind of thinking about the different types of crashes, these are in 4 primary areas. We call these our target zero indicators. Target zero, by the way, is a phrase used by the state of Washington. The Target Zero plan was most recently updated in 2024. That is a statewide plan that handles transportation, roadway safety from a state perspective. And there is some value for us to align with the state plan. A lot of our funding is administered by the state DOT, especially grant funding. So being able to get to that funding, this alignment with Target Zero has some value. So one place we specifically align with Target Zero is these emphasis areas. You can see they're grouped in 4 different types: high-risk behaviors. These would be things like impaired by drugs and alcohol, speeding, et cetera. Crash types are the locations, things like lane departure, intersection crashes. Road users by group, one thing we know from the research over several decades is that young drivers and older drivers each have kind of some unique needs, from each other, but also unique from other kind of middle-aged drivers. So there's some different things we look at when we look at those groups. And then also road users by mode of travel, making sure we're paying particular attention to active road users, that'd be bikes, pedestrians, scooters, and then motorcyclists as a separate kind of subcategory of that too. Next slide. We're also able to see how common these attributes are. One thing that's important to us, we have a limited amount of funding. This is a very big problem that's extremely complicated and complex. And so our ability to tackle it really comes down to us trying to understand the problem better. So one way we do that is we try to determine what are the most common attributes to crashes. And what we found on unincorporated roads in Pierce County, looking at 5 years of data, you can see here, these are those same categories that I mentioned on the previous slide. And a couple that come out are lane departure. So again, these are people who are running off the road, or head-on crashes also fall under lane departures when a vehicle departs its normal travel way or its lane of travel. A couple more that come out is intersection-related, 39% of crashes. Let me back up one step too. These are crashes that resulted in at least one fatality or one serious injury. So it's a crash event where at least one person was either killed or seriously injured in that crash. And 39% of the time, those crashes are occurring at intersections in Pierce County. And the other is that 1/3 of those crashes involved a young driver. Importantly, not necessarily was the young driver the person who was hurt or killed in that crash. They also were not necessarily at fault. We don't have that detailed data. That's not provided from the officer's report, but they were involved in the crash. So we believe there's work that we can do in driver training, et cetera, to address novice drivers. Next slide, please. And then the Vision Zero Action Plan has several pages of strategies. I'm not going to go through those in any detail today. This is just a set of a few of those. One quick story I will tell, on the distraction area, there's a bullet there called the Smart Signs Program. This is a pilot that was tested here in Pierce County, near Puyallup, in the city of Puyallup, and then the Washington Traffic Safety Commission also had some grant money that went to Spokane. So I think there were 2 different areas in the state last year. The Smart Sign is taking the concept of a speed radar sign, so if you've driven and seen that your speed is 35, is taking that and also adding in some camera and AI technology that also determines whether somebody's holding their phone to their face, they can see that, and whether they have a seatbelt on, the driver or a front seat passenger, and they can provide them very specific feedback, like put your phone down or buckle up if they see, say, a block ahead, they saw that somebody was not wearing a seatbelt or using their phone. So pretty interesting, just way for us to expand, not just provide speed data, but think about these other behaviors as well, using a similar type of technology. Next slide. Some additional just representative strategies. These are just some examples. Each of these is expanded in quite a bit of detail in the plan itself. Next slide. Next is looking briefly at safety needs prioritization. Everything we've just talked about so far has been mainly types of crashes or the attributes. Now we're going to look at the locations where we identified those safety needs on county roads within the county. Next slide. The primary way we did this, this is an hour presentation by itself, which I will not give you today, is various different scoring criteria. We started with what we call the high injury network. These are the locations within the county where fatal and serious injury crashes have occurred. So that's really the base work that we do. I've studied crash data for 25 years, and this is the starting point, is where these crashes occurred in the past. The limitation of that data set, however, is those crash locations are not particularly predictive. The place where people get hurt and killed in crashes doesn't necessarily replicate year to year to year, and so we need to be sure we're pulling in other data as well. So while the crash data is part of that puzzle, the other things we bring to this are, there's some other what we call risk factors. So these would be things like traffic volume is a risk factor. Of course, more cars, there's more opportunity for a crash to occur. Roadway conditions, the number of lanes, shoulder, if there is shoulder or no shoulder, that may, if there's no shoulder at all on a higher speed roadway, that can increase the risk of a lane departure crash, for example. But if you have a wide shoulder, especially if it's paved, then you'd have a lower risk. So that gets factored into this mix as well. We also took a very particular look at the Pierce County Equity Index and scored that as another layer. And then if you remember the slide I showed you a bit back, the input from the public engagement. So those some comments on locations or a lot of comments on locations, that got folded into this scoring matrix as well. And so these locations could get a score of up to 11 points in this particular area. And then you can see on the map on the right side of the screen what roadways receive the highest scores from this prioritized segments. And this one, I should have said at the beginning, this was looking at segments specifically. So these are not intersection related crashes. These are only crashes that occurred at non-intersections. If you remember before, about 40% of the fatal and serious injury crashes happen at intersections. So the other 60%-ish are happening between intersections. And next slide. We did a very similar scoring effort at the intersections themselves. Intersections, of course, are really important. There's a lot of work that we can do there. The treatments there are very specific and different than the treatments that we have for segments, so we do look at them separately. I won't go through the detail there, but you can see the same type of criteria that we had previously. So this is kind of the heat map, essentially, or the points scored at those locations. Next slide. And here we identified about 10 priority locations. This is both in the segment. You're going to see another slide with the intersections. These are not in a hierarchy here. They're, I was going to say north to south, but they're just kind of lettered so you can indicate where they are, but it's not, the top one's not the worst is what I'm trying to say on this slide. The one there on Waller Road that you see highlighted, we did as part of our scope of work produce an additional sketch design and planning level cost estimate to help Planning and Public Works with some upcoming grant opportunities. Next slide. And then these similarly are about 10 intersections that were also on that list. And again, the top two on this list were two that we did additional work on, some sketch designs and planning level cost estimates there as well. Next slide, please. It's just an overview of the Safe Streets and Roads for All program, this by USDOT. That program funded this plan. The work me standing here in front of you today was funded through SS4A. SS4A also has other funding parts. So the part that was funded for this effort was the plan itself. They also have what they call a supplemental planning and demonstration grant where we can do additional, the county can do additional planning type projects, developing specific programs, et cetera. Then there also is an implementation part of the SS4A program that funds larger capital type projects, larger projects. We are anticipating the notice of funding opportunity, the NOFO, to be released any day now. The website and my contacts at USD have told me it should be released by the end of March. There will be some changes to that program based on the new administration and the executive branch at the US and USDOT secretary. We do anticipate that this safety plan that we spoke about today needs to be approved likely by the end of April or maybe May. Again, won't know any day exactly what that date is, but there will be a deadline for this plan needs to be fully adopted by council in order for the county to be eligible for this next round of grant funding. And happy to discuss that further as needed. Yeah, and then there's kind of an eligibility worksheet we go through, and we've very much throughout this project made sure that we are addressing those needs. Next slide. Yeah, that's what I have for you today. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
Okay, Thank you. I appreciate you condensing it down. Obviously, you could go on more on the explanation, but I appreciate that. Any questions of committee members? Committee member Herrera.
Thank you, Chair. I know we're pressed for time, so I'll be quick. On great work, looking in a deep dive and everything. When it comes to this study of like some of the top reasons why there's accidents and things like that, impairment and speeding, these are nothing new. Those two top things have always been an issue when it comes to traffic for for probably 50 years. So, but I guess my question is on that study, was there any surprises? Because it hasn't changed in 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
Yeah, the only thing I would respond on that is you're right, speed and impairment has always been on the list. Their proportion has increased significantly in the last 5 years since COVID lockdown. This has happened here, it's happened statewide, it's happened nationally. We initially saw that whenever there was no one on the freeway, people were kind of driving crazy. The number of citations above 100 miles per hour went way up in 2020 and 21 from State Patrol in Washington. And impairment has gone up. I think as we've maybe at least anecdotally know that at least that there's been more alcohol, drug abuse, generally speaking, since lockdown. Those social ills end up on the roadway, right? People still get in their car even if they are having, those issues or those. I think those are kind of two. The one that I've gotten in trouble for this before, but I'm going to say it again, was a surprise to me because my own ignorance walking into this project is having bike and pedestrian fatalities and serious injuries being so high within unincorporated Pierce County. And that was my own lack of knowledge at the beginning of this project of not fully grasping the urban nature of parts of the county. And so I think that's just a good note that sometimes, especially from the outside looking in, that thinking about a county road system, we often think just rural. And so being sure that we're understanding, and that came out in the public, all the public engagement work that we did, that of course came out in the data, but understanding how important the active transportation piece of this plan is, quote unquote, even though it's a county Vision Zero action plan.
I got it. Yeah. So the surprise is how many pedestrians and bicycle.
Yeah, and how interested the public was of addressing those needs.
Absolutely. So I know you probably got all this from police reports. Did you track any of the people who were involved with accidents that were suspended license folks or people with no licenses? Because there is stats out there that 60% of all accidents are produced by people who are suspended or don't have a license at all.
Yeah, I don't remember in this particular study if we pulled that. That's something we can definitely go back and look at. I know it typically is available in the officer's crash report. Yeah. The numbers that I've seen historically are maybe more like 20%, but that's still a huge number, right? And so one thing that we think about sometimes is revoking or suspending licenses was one of our strategies often. Like if people get too many tickets or if they get another DUI, but understanding that people are back on the street, that suspending a license, someone who's going to choose to drink and drive 7 times or get that many tickets, they also may choose to drive on a suspended license. And so that is, frankly, something I've changed my mind about in the last decade or so, is seeing that strategy as not the end-all be-all. Just because we suspend somebody's license doesn't mean they won't be back on the street driving a vehicle.
Well, it is a crime, and you could go to jail for it, but we stopped taking people to jail for those type of things. So maybe there's a correlation there. But my last question, Chair, if I may, is with all the changes with DC and how grants may be coming out, is this plan, because you've been planning it with another administration in mind and maybe anticipated monies, is this plan going to work if it's totally different when it comes to grants coming down?
Yeah,
you approve this in April?
Fantastic question. And the answer is yes. The traffic safety is so broad and so multifaceted that the types of projects that you can propose for and get funding for really do cross the aisle. Like everything from, we may see more emphasis in this next NOFO on law enforcement and technology type solutions and more kind of meat and potatoes, traditional traffic safety projects, intersection projects. Maybe there will be more or less emphasis on equity or bicycle pedestrian. We don't know until we see the NOFO. But frankly, there is kind of an unending need, right? The need is so great that we have plenty of strategies and projects in kind of all categories, regardless of the political spectrum.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for those questions, comments. Any other questions of any committee members? Member Ayala.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question, and I know you don't have the answer, but I'd be very interested in knowing the percentage of youth drivers who were the cause of an accident, as opposed to just someone who was the victim, if that at all is something we can get in the future.
Yeah, we actually don't. There's really no crash reports that do that. One of the biggest reasons is the officer is not there at the scene. And so, they collect the data they can collect. They get data from witnesses, and they can, and there are times, I say we don't get it. There are times that you can infer. Like, you can look at you can look at the narrative, you can study an individual crash and say, oh, it's, it feels obvious to me reading it that vehicle 1 was at fault here. They're the one who ran the red light, right? Sometimes it is obvious. Sometimes not so much. The other thing about novice drivers is there are crashes that many of us who have experience can avoid that a novice driver may not be able to avoid because they just don't have the skills yet, right? They haven't run into that situation yet. So it isn't even necessarily just about at fault. It's about what kind of training have they had prior to getting their permit or prior to getting their license with their permit. What kind of hours are they getting? Have they gotten formal training, et cetera?
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay. I just have one or two comments, and then sorry about the time, but
all good.
Several of us got another function we have to go to. Maybe some of the other committee members can stay longer. My comment is when you really need to make sure law enforcement is involved in this. All I can say is emphasis patrols have had a huge impact, especially on the Canyon Road corridor. When you write hundreds of tickets, people start becoming aware of their driving habits. So I think when you look at a lot of the top issues, law enforcement has to be involved. They have to be at the table. There again, this county has to fund that priority. As much as I like building infrastructure, I think there's things that we need to do in conjunction with the Sheriff's Department, especially in unincorporated, to make anything work. Just putting sidewalks in is not going to solve our problem. Just putting bike lanes in is not going to solve our problem. I would like to break this down further if you have more data, like alcohol versus drugs, the increase since cannabis has been, allowable in the state. How much has that ratcheted up? Cell phone use is always going to be a challenge. I told committee member Herrera I'm waiting for someone to sue a cell phone company, similar to they do with gun manufacturers, because there are things they could do to keep that phone not operating in a vehicle, but you allow 911 access to it. But no one has done that yet. But if you look at overall, I can guarantee you can go to any trucking company that operates, and they will tell you, because of their bird's eye view, how many drivers are checking their phones while sitting in an intersection or driving. And it's huge amount. So there again, how do you deal with that issue? Anyway, those are my comments, and I appreciate you bringing forth technology. This council's been very aggressive at giving tools to law enforcement to help in their job. We looked at LPR, license plate readers. I still think those would be a great asset to have, but there again, there are certain things that need to be done. But I think emerging technologies is always something that is a multiplier that we could use. So I appreciate the work on this. I know a lot of effort went into it. I still would like to dive into, plus the actual turnout. You mentioned that there were 900 comments, but on your open house, how many hits did you get, or whatever you talk about? Because, we're approaching 1 million people in Pierce County, and if we're only getting, a small spattering, 1%, we need to look at how we get that information out to our community. So with that, thank you. Mr. Swanson, what's the next in the process of dealing with this report?
The next step would be at our April 8th meeting, hopefully getting the actual resolution to adopt the action plan, which, as was stated earlier, with the NOFA for the federal funding availability, that would then allow for the application of those grant fundings when that NOFA becomes available. So we would anticipate that in this committee on April 8th. And then April 22nd or possibly 29th, but I think 22nd is the target date currently for final at council.
Okay. So if we put together a resolution to accept the plan, that doesn't commit us to any dollar amount. It's just we just accept the presentation of the plan.
It would just be accepting the presentation of the plan in response to the initial resolution requesting the plan to be developed. It would be accepting as final. And Planning and Public Works, I know, put that resolution together. The executive staff is currently reviewing it and getting prepared to transmit that to council for us to begin our staff review. So that resolution is in the works and being prepared to be brought forward.
Okay. There again, I think it's critical that you get support of the Sheriff's Department to move forward with this. We can make all the greatest plans in the world, but if we can't get enforcement or cooperation to enforce, then we're in trouble. So, and I appreciate there again the Sheriff's Department, their emphasis patrols to date, because I think it has been an impact. And I will say that's collaborative. City of Puyallup, Bonnie Lake, Lakewood have all helped in unincorporated Pierce County in that effort. So I appreciate that. So with that, is there any other business before this committee?
There is not.
Okay. And our next meeting?
The next meeting is April 8th. We anticipate several pieces of legislation, again, including the resolution for the Vision Zero Action Plan. And then also the highlight of that, your council-directed neighborhood traffic safety program resolution. We also hope to have at that April 8th meeting. The April 22nd meeting, we're putting together the permit efficiency panel. So you have another panel discussion, this one focused on efficiency and permitting. And yeah, with that, those are your next couple meetings coming up for the remainder of.
Okay, thank you.
For April.
Okay, yeah, check your emails, and we'll move forward. But I appreciate everyone's involvement on the committee level. I appreciate staff showing up. There again, I apologize about the hard stop, but we'll have more questions moving forward. So thank you. Meeting's adjourned.